I heard it through the hallway door, the words my son-in-law didn't know I was close enough to catch. How much longer is she going to be here, Diane? I didn't sign up to take care of her forever. There was a pause. Then my daughter's voice, quieter than I would have liked. Just give it a little more time. I was standing in the hallway holding a bowl of chicken soup I'd made from scratch, still warm, the steam curling up toward my face. I had taken off my slippers so I wouldn't wake her. I'd knocked softly on the door frame of the kitchen before I climbed the stairs, careful not to disturb anyone. I set the bowl down on the small table in the hallway without a sound. Then I walked back to my room and closed the door the way I always did, gently, so no one would notice me. I lay on the bed in the dark for a long time, not crying, just listening to the house settle around me. I had moved into my daughter's spare bedroom 11 months earlier, after my husband of 34 years passed away from a stroke he never recovered from. The house we'd lived in for 3 decades had sold within a week, faster than I was ready for. My daughter had stood in my kitchen the day after the closing and said, "Mom, you're not staying in some apartment alone. We have the room. Come stay with us." I had believed her. I had packed 2 suitcases and a box of photographs and left the rest to the estate sale people. That was 11 months ago. Since then, I had learned the shape of a welcome wearing thin, the way dinner conversation shifted when I walked into the kitchen, the way my son-in-law would mute the television if I sat down in the living room, a small but complete signal that my presence had changed the air. My daughter would apologize for him privately, in hushed tones outside the bathroom, as if apology were a second language she was still learning. And I would say, "It's all right, sweetheart," because that was what I had always done. I smoothed things over. I made space. I made myself smaller than I was. I had done it for 67 years. The morning after I heard those words, I woke up before anyone else. I made coffee in the small drip machine on the counter, the one I had bought because their espresso maker had too many buttons, and I hadn't wanted to ask how it worked. I sat at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around the mug, and I thought about my options, the way you think through a problem when you already know the answer. I thought about my sister, Rosemary, who lived 2 states away and had 3 cats and a guest room she'd offered me 4 times in the last year. I thought about the senior community center on Birchwood Avenue where I volunteered on Thursdays, the one with the bulletin board covered in flyers for everything from yoga to estate planning workshops. I thought about the women in my Sunday morning Bible study group, Frances and Dottie and Beverly, who had been asking for months why I looked so tired. I hadn't told any of them the truth. I had said, just adjusting. That morning, I began to adjust differently. I called Frances first, because she was the practical one. She picked up on the second ring, already sounding awake, already sounding like herself. I told her everything. Not just the words I'd heard through the door, but all of it, the 11 months of dinners I hadn't been invited to join, the holiday gathering where my son-in-law had told their friends I was just staying for a while, the birthday that came and went in March, with nothing but a store-bought card slipped under my door. I told her about the soup I had carried up the stairs and left in the hallway. I didn't embellish a single detail. Frances was quiet for a moment when I finished. Then she said, "Eleanor, how soon can you meet me for coffee?" I met her at the diner on Maple Street at 9 o'clock. She was already in a booth with her reading glasses pushed up on her head and a legal pad on the table. That was how Frances approached most things. She ordered me oatmeal and told me to eat while she talked. She had a friend, she said, a woman named Patricia, who had gone through something similar 3 years earlier. Patricia had found an apartment through a program she hadn't known existed, a subsidized housing option specifically for women over 60 in our county. Quiet building, mostly teachers and retired nurses and women who'd raised families and needed a place that was theirs without apology. I listened to everything she said. I ate the oatmeal without tasting it. When she slid the legal pad across the table with a name and a phone number written at the top, I folded it once and put it in my coat pocket. You're not asking too much, Frances said. You never were. I drove home slowly, the way I always do in November when the leaves are wet on the road. My daughter's house looked ordinary from the outside, the way all houses do when they're keeping secrets. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment before going in. My son-in-law's truck was gone. My daughter's car was in the garage. Through the front window, I could see the glow of the television. I went upstairs and opened the notebook I kept in the nightstand drawer. I wrote the name and number Frances had given me. Then I wrote a second list. Everything that was mine in that house, my clothing, my sewing basket, the box of photographs, the blue quilt from my mother, the cast iron skillet my husband had given me on our 5th anniversary, the rocking chair I'd been sitting in since before my daughter was born. Everything else I had left behind already. The list was smaller than I expected. It didn't take long to write. That fact told me something. I called the housing office the next morning from the parking lot of the grocery store because I wanted privacy and I wasn't sure I had it at home anymore. A woman named Gloria answered. Her voice was unhurried, the kind of calm that comes from long experience with people in difficult situations. She asked me a few questions and explained the application process simply and directly. There was currently a unit available on the 2nd floor, south-facing, she said, close to the bus line, washer and dryer on each floor. Could I come see it this week? I asked. How is Thursday afternoon? She said. Thursday was my volunteer day at Birchwood. I said, I'll be there at 2. I didn't mention any of this to my daughter. That week, I moved quietly through the house the way I had always moved through it, carefully, invisibly, not wanting to be a disruption. But something had shifted in me. The invisibility was no longer a concession. It had become strategy. Every morning I had coffee alone before anyone woke up. Every evening, I ate the dinner I'd made for myself in my room, on the small tray with the fold-out legs that I'd brought from my old house. I read. I sorted. I began, slowly, to separate the things I was keeping from the things that could be left behind. On Wednesday evening, my daughter knocked on my bedroom door. She had the same apologetic look she'd been wearing for 11 months, the one that said she knew things weren't right but hadn't decided what to do about that yet. Mom, she said, leaning against the doorframe. Are you okay? You've been so quiet. I'm fine, I said. Just thinking. She looked at the book open in my lap, then at the neatly folded clothes on the chair by the window. Something in her face shifted, though she didn't say what she was seeing. He didn't mean it like that, she said, after a pause long enough to tell me she'd known I'd heard. I looked up at her. I didn't ask which part she meant. I already knew. What did he mean it like? I asked. She opened her mouth and then closed it. She crossed her arms the way she'd done since she was a teenager when she didn't want to be held accountable for something. I recognized the gesture the way mothers recognize all of them, the 10,000 small motions that map a person from the inside out. It's complicated, she said. I know, I said. And I meant it. I did know. Complicated was the word people used when the truth was simple, but the consequences of saying it out loud were not. She left without saying anything else. I turned back to my book and read the same paragraph 3 times before I gave up. Thursday came with low clouds and the smell of rain that never quite arrived. I told no one where I was going. I volunteered at Birchwood until noon, helped 3 people with crossword puzzles in the reading room, then drove across town to the address Gloria had given me. The building was modest from the outside. Brick, 4 stories, window boxes with the last of the fall mums still hanging on. A man was sweeping the front walk when I pulled in. He nodded at me like I already belonged there. Gloria met me in the lobby. She was a small woman in her 50s, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the handshake of someone who had helped a lot of people make hard decisions. She walked me up to the 2nd floor and unlocked the door to Unit 214. The apartment was not large, but it was honest. A living room with 2 wide windows facing south, a kitchen with white tile and a stove that had never been abused, a bedroom with a closet deep enough for everything I had left. The floors were wood laminate, clean and unscratched. There was a silence in the place that didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like waiting. I stood at the kitchen window for a long moment and looked out at the courtyard below. A woman was sitting on a bench reading, her coat buttoned to the top. A small dog was tied to the leg of the bench, content. "It's quiet," I said. "Yes," Gloria said. "That's what most people say first." I turned around. "I'll take it." She smiled without surprise. "Good. Let's talk paperwork." The application was simple. The approval, given my income and situation, came through within the week. Gloria called me on a Tuesday morning to confirm. I was standing in the driveway again, phone pressed to my ear, the November air cold on my neck. "You can move in on the 1st, she said. "That gives you 2.5 weeks. I said thank you. After I hung up, I sat in my car for several minutes. I wasn't afraid. I was something closer to the feeling you have when a decision you've been delaying finally makes itself. Solid. Irreversible in the best way. That evening, I called Rosemary. She cried a little. The way she does when something makes her both sad and relieved at the same time. "I've been worried about you for months," she said. "Why didn't you call me sooner?" "I kept thinking it would get better," I said. "Eleanor," she said, in the voice she'd been using on me since we were girls. "You always wait too long to leave things that aren't good for you." She wasn't wrong. My daughter found out on a Thursday. I had been packing slowly, one drawer at a time, mostly after they'd gone to bed. But that evening, she came to my room to bring me a glass of water, an act of kindness, sudden and a little guilty feeling, and saw the boxes stacked against the wall. She set the glass down on my dresser. She looked at the boxes. Then she looked at me. "What's happening?" she said. I told her simply. I had found an apartment. I would be moving on the 1st. It was a good building, close to the center of town, south-facing windows. I was looking forward to it. She sat down on the edge of the bed, in the way people do when the floor suddenly feels uncertain. "You didn't tell me you were looking," she said. "You didn't tell me the room had a time limit," I said. Not unkindly, just honestly. She flinched. I watched her decide whether to apologize or defend, and then, in the way that children always do when they are still half the child you raised, she chose the easier path. "He didn't mean it the way it sounded," she said again. "Diane," I said. My voice was steady. "I've heard that sentence more times than it deserves. What I know is this. I heard it myself. And more importantly, when you heard it, you said, 'Give it a little more time.' Not, 'Don't speak about my mother that way.' Not, 'She's welcome here.' Time. As if I were a problem that needed a deadline." She was quiet for a long time. Her eyes were bright, but she didn't cry. That took something from her, I could tell. "I'm sorry," she said finally, barely audible. "I know," I said. "I believe you. But sorry doesn't change what's true." She left the room without saying anything else. I heard her footsteps down the stairs, then voices in the kitchen, low and indistinct. I went back to folding sweaters and placing them carefully in the box labeled Keep. My son-in-law knocked on my door the next morning. He wasn't quite looking at me when I opened it. His eyes, somewhere around my shoulder. He was holding his keys like he was about to leave, or like he wanted to be ready to. "I heard you're moving out," he said. "Yes," I said. "Look," he exhaled. "I know things have been." He paused, searching for the word. "Complicated. You said you didn't sign up to take care of me forever," I said. "I heard that. I want you to know that I heard it, and that I agree. You shouldn't have to. And now, you won't." He looked at me then. Whatever he'd expected from this conversation, it wasn't that. "I didn't know you were there," he said. "No," I said. "You never did." He left without another word. I closed the door and stood in the room that had been mine for 11 months and would be mine for 2 more weeks, and I noticed that I felt no satisfaction in the exchange at all. Just the mild, clean feeling of something being said that had needed saying. That was enough. The packing took the rest of that week. I was deliberate about it. Each object passed through my hands and I asked myself the same quiet question: does this belong in the next part of my life? The answer surprised me sometimes. The sewing basket. Yes. The collection of holiday mugs I'd carried from house to house for 20 years. No. The cast iron skillet. Absolutely. The framed photograph my son-in-law had given me 3 Christmases ago, the one where he'd cropped me to the edge of the frame. No. The blue quilt from my mother. Yes. Without question. On Saturday, Frances came over with Dottie and Beverly, and we loaded the boxes into Frances's minivan, while my daughter was at her daughter's school play, and my son-in-law was pointedly somewhere else. We didn't make it dramatic. We didn't announce anything. We just moved boxes and talked about the terrible parking downtown and whether the diner on Maple was going to change its pie crust recipe. And it was the most ordinary and saving afternoon I could remember in a long time. When the last box was in the van, I went back inside one final time. I walked through the guest room slowly, not as a farewell. I didn't owe the room a farewell. I walked to the kitchen and left the key on the counter with a note that said, "Thank you for the roof. I mean that. I hope someday the 3 of us find our way back to something true. But I can't wait for that here." I didn't sign it. She would know. The apartment on the 2nd floor of the Birchwood building on the 1st of December smelled like fresh paint and something faintly like cedar. Gloria had left a small succulent on the kitchen windowsill with a card that said, "Welcome home, Eleanor." I placed it in the center of the sill and stood for a moment looking at it. Frances and Beverly helped me unpack the kitchen first, the way women always do, because a kitchen unpacked is a home begun. We put the cast iron skillet on the stove, and I made scrambled eggs for all 3 of us, and we ate them standing, because the table wasn't set up yet. We laughed about something Dottie had said at Bible study. Nobody mentioned my daughter. Nobody mentioned anything that needed mentioning. It was just eggs and laughter in a room that was finally mine. That night, alone for the first time, I made tea and sat in the rocking chair I'd pushed to the window. The courtyard was lit from below by small lanterns along the path. The woman I'd seen on the bench during my tour. I'd learned her name was Helen. A retired schoolteacher from Ohio was walking her small dog in slow loops. She looked up toward my window and waved, not knowing me yet, but waving anyway the way people do in places where they've learned that small kindnesses cost nothing. I waved back. I slept deeply that night. The windows cracked despite the cold. The sound of the street below just present enough to remind me I was part of the world. A month passed. Then another. December became January, and January became February, and the courtyard filled with bare branches and the quiet industry of people who had made peace with the seasons. I had tea with Helen on Wednesdays. I took a watercolor class on Friday mornings at the community center 2 blocks away, badly but enthusiastically. I volunteered at Birchwood every Thursday without fail. I baked bread when the weather was cold and left extra loaves outside Helen's door, and the woman in 208, whose name I still didn't know, but who always left a small note. "Thank you," left under my doormat. My daughter called twice in January. I answered, both times. Our conversations were careful, the way early conversations always are after a real thing has been said. She asked how the apartment was. I told her it was exactly what I needed. She asked if I was warm enough, if I'd met anyone. I told her about Helen and the watercolor class and the bread. She listened. She didn't ask me to come back. I was grateful for that. On a Tuesday in February, a knock came at my door that I wasn't expecting. I opened it to find my granddaughter standing in the hallway, still in her school coat, her backpack on one shoulder, her cheeks red from the cold outside. She was 15, and had her mother's eyes and her grandfather's habit of getting straight to the point. "I had to take 2 buses," she said. "Can I come in?" "Of course," I said. She stepped inside and stood in the middle of my living room looking around at everything. The rocking chair by the window, the quilt folded over the back of the couch, Ruby's drawing "No, not Ruby." That was another story my granddaughter's sketch I'd asked her to make on her last visit, pinned above the small desk by the door. The iron skillet hanging on the kitchen wall like a trophy. "It's nice," she said. And I could tell she meant it. We sat at the kitchen table with hot chocolate because she was 15, and 15 calls for hot chocolate no matter what the conversation is. She wrapped both hands around the mug the way I always did with coffee. I noticed that and felt something quiet and full move through me. "Mom cried," she said, without preamble. "After you moved out. Like, really cried." I hadn't seen her do that since Grandpa died. I didn't say anything. I waited. "She told me what she said to you. The night she came to your room." My granddaughter looked down at the mug. "She said she should have told him to stop a long time ago. She said she was a coward." "She wasn't a coward," I said. "She was caught between 2 people she loved. That's one of the hardest places to be." "She should have picked you," my granddaughter said. 17 words, certain as gravity? "Maybe," I said. "But she's learning." My granddaughter was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her backpack and pulled out a small envelope. She slid it across the table without saying anything. I opened it. Inside was a photograph she'd printed, slightly blurry, taken last Thanksgiving of the 2 of us standing in my old backyard. I was showing her how to deadhead the mums, and she was watching me with an expression on her face I hadn't noticed in the moment, but could see clearly now. Like she was memorizing something. "I was afraid you'd disappear," she said. "Like, just become someone I used to know." "I'm not disappearing," I said. "I moved 11 minutes across town." She smiled. It looked a lot like relief. We talked for almost 2 hours. About her exams, about the debate team she'd joined, about a book she was reading that she thought I'd like. She asked me if I ever got lonely. I told her the truth sometimes. In the first week, I did, but a different kind of lonely than before. Before, I had been lonely in a full house. Now I was simply, sometimes alone, which is a completely different thing. "That actually makes sense," she said. Before she left, she stood in the doorway with her backpack on and looked at me the way young people sometimes look at older people when they're trying to understand something about their own future. "I want to be like you when I'm older," she said. "Not just like nice. I mean the part where you knew when to leave." I put my hand on her cheek for a moment, the way I had when she was small and would fall asleep in my lap on Sunday afternoons. "The knowing when to leave is just the first part," I said. "The knowing where to go is the rest of it." She nodded like she was filing that away. After she left, I stood at the window and watched her cross the courtyard below. She stopped to pat Helen's dog without being asked. Then she walked out through the gate and turned left toward the bus stop without looking back, the way young people do when they're confident they're leaving something good behind them. March came with rain, and then with the first real warmth of the year. I planted basil and parsley in small clay pots on the kitchen windowsill. The succulent Gloria had left me was thriving in a way that felt deliberate. I bought a second one, smaller, and named it quietly after no one in particular. My daughter came to see the apartment on a Saturday afternoon in March, alone. She didn't tell me she was coming. She just called from the parking lot downstairs and said, "I'm here, if it's okay." I said it was okay. I put the kettle on. She walked through the apartment without saying much at first, her hands clasped behind her back the way she used to walk through museum exhibits as a child, taking things in at her own pace. She stood for a long time in front of the window in the living room, looking out at the courtyard. Then she sat down across from me at the kitchen table and said, "I handled it wrong. All of it. For a long time. I didn't argue. I also didn't rush to comfort her. I had spent 67 years rushing to comfort people in my orbit when they needed to sit with something. I let her sit. I kept thinking, she continued, that if I just kept the peace, everyone would eventually be fine, that it would work itself out. She looked up at me. That's not how it works, is it? No, I said. That's how things get worse slowly. She was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry, Mom. Not for any one thing. For the accumulation of it. The accumulation of it. That was the most honest thing she had said to me in years. I felt something in my chest recognize the words, the way you recognize a piece of furniture from your childhood. Specific. Unmistakable. Thank you for saying it like that, I said. We drank tea. She told me my granddaughter had been coming to see me regularly, which she already knew, and that she was glad for it, even if the method, 2 buses, unannounced, gave her a small heart attack every time. I told her Helen had taken to joining us on the 2nd Wednesday of each month, and that my granddaughter had started calling Helen the neighborhood grandma of grandmas, which Helen found deeply amusing. She laughed. It was her real laugh, the one she'd had since she was a girl, the one that meant she had actually been caught off guard by something good. Before she left, she said, I don't expect things to go back to how they were. Good, I said. They shouldn't. They should go forward. She hugged me in the doorway, longer than she usually did. I held her the way I always had, fully, without reservation. The way mothers hold their children no matter what has passed between them, because that was still true. Some things survive everything. After she left, I went back to the window. The courtyard was green now, the first real green of the year. New shoots coming up through the beds along the path. Helen was outside with her dog, face turned up toward the thin March sun, eyes closed, just existing in the warmth, the small contentment of it. I put on my coat and went downstairs. Room for one more? I said. Helen opened one eye. I thought you'd never come down. We walked the perimeter of the courtyard in the afternoon light, not saying much, just moving through the world at the pace it deserved. The dog investigated every corner with the full commitment of the small-bodied and the curious. Above us, the sky was the particular blue that only comes in early March, after winter has finally agreed to let go. I didn't think about the house I'd left. I didn't think about the dinner tables where I'd been seated out of sight. I didn't think about the bowl of soup left in a hallway by a woman who had made herself quiet for too long. I thought about the basil on my windowsill, the watercolor class on Friday, the bread that went under the door in 208, my granddaughter on 2 buses, my daughter in the doorway, with her real laugh. I thought about the rocking chair by the window in Unit 214, where some nights I sat and read until 10 o'clock without apologizing to anyone for the light. Sometimes people ask why any of this matters. Why a woman my age would start over in a small apartment with 4 pieces of furniture and a succulent named after no one. And I think about that night in the hallway, the soup going cold in my hands, the voice through the door. I think about how I had walked back to my room and lain down in the dark, not in defeat, in decision, because that was the night I stopped waiting to be seen and started being someone worth seeing. Those 2 things sound the same. They are nothing alike. One of them keeps you in hallways holding soup that isn't wanted. The other one puts you in a courtyard in March with a woman named Helen and a dog who doesn't care what your name is, only that your hands are open and willing. Mine are open. They have been. A long time. I'm just more careful now about who I hand things to.